Frank Fritz spent his whole life digging through other people's forgotten treasures, barns, garages, attics, and dead ends, somehow managing to turn rust into gold. But beneath the dusty barns, faded signs, and hidden corners shone on American Pickers, a much more emotional, complicated, and shocking real-life story was unfolding, one that never appeared on camera. When Frank passed away on September 30th, 2024, at only 60 years old, what was discovered inside his private estate did not just surprise his fans. It left them completely speechless. A broken friendship, secret health battles, a $6 million legal war, and a garage filled with unbelievable items all came to light. This tale is not merely about antiques. It is about everything he left behind. Before the drama, the stroke, and the lawsuits, there was a television show that genuinely changed the game. American Pickers first aired on the History Channel on January 18, 2010, and by almost any measure, it became an immediate sensation. More than 3.1 million people watched that very first episode, which, for a program about two guys driving around in a white van buying old stuff from strangers, was nothing short of extraordinary. The concept was straightforward. Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz would show up at barns, farms, and cluttered properties across rural America, sort through decades of neglected junk, and walk away with objects that carried stories nobody else thought worth telling. Yet it was not the antiques that people truly fell in love with. It was the men themselves. Frank was the one who made everything feel real. While Mike often came across as a smooth-talking businessman focused on resale value, Frank was the funny, slightly scruffy, emotionally intelligent best friend who would stop in the middle of a field just to hold a rusty old fire helmet and explain why it mattered. He had a disarming warmth and an everyman charm that made viewers feel like they were riding alongside an old friend. His love for vintage fire department memorabilia and beat-up motorcycles was not an act. It was deeply genuine, the kind of passion that cannot be faked for the camera, and audiences recognized that immediately. Longtime fans began noticing something subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. In later seasons, especially, Frank did not always appear to be himself. The energy was still there and the jokes still worked, but a certain tiredness lurked beneath the surface, a heaviness that did not fit the show's upbeat mood. Sometimes he leaned on objects longer than necessary. Other times, he went quiet while Mike handled the conversation. Rewatching those episodes now, with everything we know, the experience feels completely different. What seemed like a guy just having a bad day was actually someone pushing through real physical pain just to keep going. That is the side of fame rarely discussed. When you become part of something that millions rely on for comfort, entertainment, or routine, you do not always get to stop when your body tells you to. You keep showing up, smiling, and filming. Frank did exactly that. Until he could not anymore. The show ran for over a decade, filming across dozens of states and recording more than 300 episodes. It made both men household names, leading to merchandise, spin-offs, fan conventions, and the whole machine kicking into gear. Frank opened his own antique store, Frank Fritz Finds, in Savannah, Illinois, which became a genuine destination for fans wanting to feel close to the man they watched every week. For someone who never aimed to be famous, Frank had built something quite extraordinary. But behind every fun road trip episode, Frank was quietly managing a body that was starting to fail him, along with a personal life far more complicated than the easy smiles on television ever suggested. The cameras captured the treasure hunts. They did not capture the cost. Frank Fritz was born on October 11, 1963, in Davenport, Iowa, a city right on the Mississippi River, the kind of blue-collar Midwestern town where everyone knows everyone else's family and nobody really leaves unless they have a very good reason. Even after becoming famous, Davenport never truly left him. From the time he was a child, Frank was different in the best possible way. While other kids focused on sports cards or video games, Frank was drawn to old stuff, weird stuff, the kind of items that collected dust in grandparents' basements and got thrown out on curbs every spring. He started collecting as a young boy, attracted to objects with history embedded in them. The dents, the scratches, the mystery of where something had been and who had touched it before him. It was not hoarding. It was almost spiritual. He genuinely believed that objects held stories, and that those stories deserved to be kept alive. His particular obsession with fire department memorabilia began early. Vintage helmets, old badges, brass nozzles. Frank thought they were the most American things imaginable. Men who ran toward danger while everyone else ran away, and the tools they used to do it. For a kid growing up in the heartland, there was something deeply romantic about that. As he got older, his collecting expanded. Motorcycles entered the picture, not just as machines, but as rolling sculptures. Frank had a specific taste: Indian motorcycles, classic Harley-Davidsons, and half-finished custom choppers, sitting in someone's shed waiting to be loved again. He tracked them down the way others hunted for rare books or concert tickets, and he was relentless about it. Frank did not take the traditional route after high school. No four-year degree, no corporate ladder to climb. Instead, he leaned into what he knew. He worked odd jobs, kept collecting and trading, and eventually built a small operation he called Frank's Finds. It was humble and scrappy, but it was his. That little shop, that street-level hustle, eventually caught the attention of a fellow Iowa picker named Mike Wolf. The two men shared a worldview. They both believed that America's back roads were loaded with buried treasures that nobody was paying attention to. They had an almost evangelical belief in the value of things the rest of the world had written off as junk. When the idea for a television show began to take shape, it felt like destiny. Two guys from Iowa doing what they had always done, except now with cameras and a national audience. Frank Fritz did not stumble into fame. He earned it through decades of obsession, hard work, and genuine love for the forgotten and overlooked. But fame, as Frank would eventually discover, does not protect you from the things falling apart inside your own body. Frank's body had been keeping a very serious secret. Here is a fact that the show quietly glossed over for years. He was sick. Not a little under the weather, but chronically, painfully, relentlessly sick. And he showed up to work anyway, season after season, because that was who he was. Frank had been living with Crohn's disease for most of his adult life. Crohn's is a brutal autoimmune condition that causes severe inflammation in the digestive tract, leading to crippling abdominal pain, exhausting fatigue, dramatic weight changes, and a daily existence that can feel like your own body is waging war against you. It is not a background condition. It demands your full attention. Frank managed it for years while filming a physically demanding television show, traveling constantly and projecting warmth and energy on camera. Then came the back surgery. At some point, Frank's spine became a whole separate emergency. The surgery he underwent was not minor. He came out of it with 185 stitches and metal rods in his back. 185 stitches. Let that sink in. This was major reconstructive surgery on a man already fighting Crohn's disease, and it forced a significant period away from the show. He was open about the fact that recovery was brutal. Beneath all of that, woven through the physical pain, the long stretches of downtime, and the isolation of recovery, there was a struggle with addiction that Frank eventually spoke about with remarkable honesty. He acknowledged it publicly, did not try to spin it or bury it, and made genuine efforts to address it. His manager, Bill Stanky, confirmed that Frank was dealing with multiple layers of health challenges right up until the end of his life. The combination, Crohn's, the back surgery, the addiction battles, all of it started to catch up with him during filming. By 2020 and into 2021, his absences from the show became more frequent. Fans noticed. The internet buzzed with questions. Then, in July 2021, Mike Wolf posted a statement on social media confirming what many fans had feared. Frank Fritz would not be returning to American Pickers. The statement was measured, polished, and said all the right things about love and support. But reading between the lines, there was something it was not saying. Frank went on record, raw and unfiltered, clearly hurt, and said that Mike Wolf had never once reached out to check on him during his entire recovery. Not a phone call, not a text, nothing. "I haven't heard from Mike," Frank said. "That kind of hurts." For a man who had spent over a decade as your on-screen best friend, those words landed like a gut punch. In July 2022, Frank was at his farmhouse in Davenport, Iowa, the same $155,000 property where he kept his bikes, his collection, his life, when he suffered a massive stroke. He was alone. By the time help arrived, the damage was severe. Frank spent roughly a month in the hospital. The stroke had devastated his ability to function independently, affecting his mobility, his speech, and his capacity to make decisions for himself. The man who had spent decades picking through America's forgotten corners, sharp-eyed and relentlessly curious, could no longer lift his own arm without it falling back down. The most heartbreaking part of Frank's stroke is not just what it did to his body, but what it took from his identity. This was a man who made a living through movement, traveling, exploring, digging, discovering. His entire personality was built around curiosity and independence. The stroke did not just limit that, it erased it. Friends said he was frustrated, that he knew exactly what he had lost. In August 2022, his loved ones filed for guardianship and conservatorship on his behalf, and the courts granted it. His friend Chris Davis became his legal guardian, and Midwest One Bank was appointed conservator. Frank needed 24-hour care. Jerry Gendreau, a friend who had known Frank for decades, said that one side of Frank's body was completely paralyzed, describing how Frank would lift his arm up and it would just drop back down. Medical bills reportedly reached approximately $29,000 per month. Frank died on September 30, 2024, at 60 years old. His last recorded words were, "The past is never really gone. It's always with us, hiding in the shadows." When they opened the doors to Frank's world, they found rows upon rows of motorcycles packed into an outhouse on his Davenport property. Indian motorcycles, classic Harley-Davidsons, custom choppers, some finished and gleaming, others still half-assembled mid-project. Not everything was finished. Many bikes were mid-restoration, with tools nearby and notes scribbled. It was like walking into a paused moment. Frank was not just collecting for the sake of owning things. He was constantly working on them, bringing them back to life. His friend Jerry Gendreau confirmed that the plan is to auction the collection. Some bikes are also expected to be displayed at Hog Dogs, a bar and antique store Gendreau operates. Beyond the bikes, there is a broader antique collection of vintage signs and fire department memorabilia. His store, Frank Fritz Finds in Savannah, Illinois, continued operating even after his stroke. Now, all of it is part of an estate estimated at $6 million. But things got complicated. Frank's lawyer filed his will with the court in October 2023, a year before his death, to keep it safe. After he died, a certificate was issued approving the will on October 18, 2024. Then, on December 30, 2024, an attorney entered the case on behalf of a friend of Frank's, signaling dissatisfaction with the will. On February 3, 2025, that attorney filed a formal petition to set aside the will entirely, demanding a trial. By late February 2025, Frank's father, William, filed a separate challenge, arguing that the will was invalid because Frank did not have the mental capacity to sign it in 2023 while under guardianship. Friends are divided. One insisted Frank was in his right mind. Another described him as totally bedridden. The case files are sealed. This is not just about money. It is about control. Who gets to decide what Frank's life meant, and who gets to speak for him now that he is gone. The bikes sit in the garage, the antiques wait in the store, the lawyers are circling, and the real story of what Frank wanted for his life's collection is still waiting to be picked out from the wreckage.